To start this very last mini unit, a bit of review from earlier in the semester. Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian throne, which means he was from the Habsburg family. And his uncle was very, very old, very, very strict. And Franz Ferdinand very publicly said that he wanted to modernize the empire. He wanted to give different groups within the empire more power rather than use strict control to maintain peace. He was assassinated in July of 1914 in the city of Sarajevo, Bosnia. Bosnia was part of the Austrian Empire. He was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, who was part of the Black Hand organization. The Black Hand was a secret terrorist group controlled by the Serbian government. Serbia is next door to Bosnia. Both people are Slavic people. Serbia was independent and wanted to reconnect or reunite what they called Greater Serbia, and that included Bosnia. They wanted to bring together those two countries because Bosnia was under Austrian control. But if Franz Ferdinand came to power and modernized the system and gave more rights to the people, then the Bosnians wouldn't want to reunite with Serbia. So by eliminating Franz Ferdinand, they saw a chance to reunite Bosnia and Serbia. We left off in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union. That means that not only is communism over in general, but all of these countries in Eastern Europe now no longer have to obey the rules given to them by someone else. They don't have to follow along with sort of those puppet governments afraid of that strict control and the tanks being sent in. So communism can end, which is a great thing. But it's going to take a lot of work. If we look at the countries like the satellite states or the countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact, like East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, those countries were already independent countries and simply had been following orders from the Soviet Union. But also with the fall of the Soviet Union, we have new countries that get to be independent. Countries that had formerly been part of those Soviet socialist republics or part of Soviet Russia, like Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, the Baltic states. These are countries that now get independence for the first time. The problem is with all of these countries in Eastern Europe is they haven't done this on their own for almost 50 years. They need help setting up their government, establishing a military, all the things that a country needs to run smoothly. But they don't have any money because the Soviets have controlled everything for so long. So this is where the World Bank and International Monetary Fund come in. They will loan money to these Eastern European countries. Now, that is an expensive proposition, but the alternative was chaos. Maybe they'd have to send in troops from neighboring countries to quell the chaos. Instead, this is a long-term investment. And the World Bank, like any other bank, different countries are putting their money into the World Bank, and then the World Bank can make the decision who they want to loan money to. They're hoping that by loaning money to these countries, it will create peace, it will build up their economy, and eventually these countries will trade with the rest of the world, which benefits everyone. So it's a long-term investment. Russia is a bit different, however. When Boris Yeltsin came to power, he wanted free market capitalism. We go from a system where the government owns everything. The government owns production. There is total equality to all of a sudden individuals can be business owners and make lots and lots of money. So let's say, for example, the steel industry. Let's say there was a steel plant the government had owned and now is owned by Vladimir Shmyhal. He now has more money than he ever had before. He has lots of wealth and he can buy lots of things. And he can buy many houses around the world, especially in London. There's a big population of Russian industrialists and wealthy Russians called the oligarchs. They now can buy lots of things. More average sort of middle-class citizens have access to new things like McDonald's. You can see that they're lining up around the block for McDonald's because it was new, because it symbolizes the West. But if we have a group of people who is getting more powerful and more wealthy, it also means that there are people who are getting poorer. So some people love the new system. Some people hate it because those who are getting more and more poor, more destitute, under communism, they had relative equality. So some people really love the new system, some people really dislike it. One part of Russia's story has to do with Chechnya. Chechnya is this teeny tiny area. It was one of the Soviet Socialist republics, so like Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, had been part of Soviet Russia. When Chechnya looks at those countries and says, okay, they got independence, Ukraine gets to be its own country, Belarus gets to be its own country, we want the same thing. So in the mid-90s, they start fighting for their independence, and it fails because they're fighting Russia. Even though Russia is weak, a weak Russia, because it's so huge and there's so many people, is still stronger than teeny tiny Chechnya. As a result of this failed independence move, the control is even stricter, but the Russians also back out. So it's sort of like if a rebellious teenager was cut off from his parents' credit card. That punishment is being cut off. While the Chechens do get a little bit of independence because they don't have that daily interaction with Russia, they have no help for the economy. They have no help for political stability. And then in the mid to late 90s, another tension becomes apparent, and that's the religious tension. Most Chechens are Muslim, which is a holdover from when the Ottoman Empire controlled this part of the world. So we have not only the political goal of independence, but now we have sort of this radicalized Islam that sort of the jihadist movement, the holy wars. Because Chechnya has very little, doesn't have any resources, it has no way of creating their own economy because of that Russian control. A popular way of making money then is through kidnappings. You kidnap someone and their hopefully wealthy family is forced to pay a ransom. So lots of terrorism is used, and then terrorism outside of their own borders, especially against Russian people in Russian places, to try and get the attention of the world and try and force Russia to give them total independence. And the Tsarnaev brothers, the brothers who placed the bombs at the Boston Marathon in 2013, were originally from Chechnya. They had fled this area during the 90s when it was completely chaotic. Now today it's relatively peaceful because they have a new leader who's incredibly strict. But it sort of speaks to, again, this issue of control. Another area of the world where control is an issue is Yugoslavia. You have never lived in a world where Yugoslavia existed, but it means all Slavs, and so you can guess that the people who live there are Slavic people. It was created after World War I. If you remember the difference between the maps before the war and after the war. Before World War I, we had the German Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, there are lots of new countries created to give self-determination to all those people groups. So here, next to the Adriatic, we have all of these different groups, and there you can see Bosnia and Serbia, all different groups of Slavic people, and they will be united into a single communist country. And the leader who will bring peace to this area, because even though they're Slavic, there are still disagreements. It is Josip Tito who will bring peace through unification. And it's because he's harsh. He looks very smiley there, but he's an incredibly strict leader, keeping down those tensions because of that control. Now, Russia was a bit upset about this because Russia sees itself as the leader of all communist countries. All communist countries must be connected to Soviet Russia in some way. Another reason there is a logical connection between this region of the world and Russia is the Slavic heritage, just like we saw before World War I. But Tito is not someone that you want to mess with. I read the excerpt from the letter in class that Tito sent to Stalin. It says, "Stop trying to kill me. You've sent 5 guys, one with a gun, one with a bomb. If you don't stop sending assassins, I will send one to Moscow and I won't have to send another." So he is, again, that strict control. And it's communism not under Russian control. But when Tito dies in the 80s, all of those tensions that he had been controlling come right back to the surface. So even though they're all Slavic, there are groups within that category. So we see in yellow the Croats. Croatians are generally Catholic. In green, we have the Serbians, who are generally Orthodox Christian. Then we have in pink the Muslims, who are largely in Bosnia. And so in the early 90s, when Tito dies, when sort of it seems like communism around the world is falling, we have these groups who start to pull apart and want their independence from Yugoslavia. They don't want to be part of this organization of different groups. As they try and pull apart, Serbia is trying to maintain this idea of Greater Serbia, of Yugoslavia. And the leader at the time is Slobodan Milosevic. He's the president of Serbia, who wants to maintain this unification. He sees, however, the real problem is in Bosnia with the Muslims. So we have the Bosnian Wars in the mid-90s, and Milosevic sees the Bosnians that they're the ones who are threatening our stability, who are threatening our safety. And so there's a series of sieges of cities, what becomes known as ethnic cleansing, so just a new type of genocide. And people are held up in their own cities. They are sieged. They are intimidated. We have lots of refugees that try and leave this part of the world. Sarajevo, the city where Franz Ferdinand had been visiting when he was assassinated, host of the 1984 Olympics, is held siege for 4 years and ends up looking like this, as you see in the bottom. So this whole region is under attack because people see other people groups as a problem, repeating these same mistakes again and again. Milosevic stays in power 95. They come to a sort of uneasy peace, is what it said in the video clips. And things are okay for a few years until in 1999 there are issues with the territory of Kosovo. You can see there in the red outline, it is part of Serbia. But one thing that's different is many of the people who live there aren't necessarily Serbians, they are Albanians. And that is a remnant from the Second World War when Albanians had controlled that territory, they moved there, they stayed there. And the Serbians and Milosevic, not well known for their acceptance of people who are different. So once again, in 99, Milosevic and the Serb start what could have become a massacre. But what's different is this time NATO steps in early on. And NATO, now Serbia is not part of NATO, Yugoslavia is not part of NATO. However, just like in the First World War, Russia is supporting Serbia. Russia is backing Serbia up. NATO says this is not acceptable. And in class, we listened to James Blunt, who is here. He was one of the very first tanks, one of the very first groups of soldiers from NATO that went into Kosovo to stop the Serbians. And as NATO said, the spokesman for NATO said, our goal is clear, to get the Serbs out, get the peacekeepers in, and get the refugees back. So to restore peace and, if necessary, fight in order to do that. Unlike the United Nations, which we've started to see is kind of powerless when it comes to actual conflict. We watched the music video for James Blunt's song No Bravery and his description of some of the war crimes, again, that the Serbians and Milosevic are doing against the Albanians. As a way to maintain peace, NATO nations use a similar format that the Allied countries used for Germany after World War II, where forces from these countries stay in Kosovo to make sure that peace is maintained. So that's where we get the term peacekeepers. Finally, Milosevic is charged with several war crimes, some of them being, it's quite a long list, genocide, complicity in genocide, deportation, murder, persecutions on political, racial, religious grounds. I mean, it is a whole paragraph of accusations. And with these types of crimes, war crimes or crimes against humanity, it needs a world court. So this is where the UN International Criminal Court comes into play. Remember, that is located at The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. He is put on trial, people come and testify, and in the midst of that trial in 2006, he dies of a heart attack in his cell. as I said in class, I do feel a little bit of hesitation at this. Someone who commits such atrocities as a human, I feel that um, they deserve punishment. But as a Christian, I am forced to remember that Milosevic's crimes, his sin, is no different than my sin in the eyes of God, that we are all equally deserving of Christ's sanctification and holiness. And these problems continue to happen because we are fallen, because we are sinful. So, a great reminder of why we need Christ in our lives.